Asbestos.
Asbestos, yeah.
Yes.
Dirty
Talk to
bird.
us a little bit about that. Why are people so concerned? Why are there additional testing some people take? Talk to us a little bit about it.
Yeah, people are concerned because they're concerned about anything that's a health risk, and asbestos is a hot button. Typically, I shouldn't say typically, most of our homes here in Southern California contain some form of asbestos, especially the homes that are, from the 80s on back. It's either going to be in some of the HVAC venting material, which is called transite. It's a clay type pipe that the furnace vents are running through to go to the exterior. Could be in your drywall tape. Could also be in your attic, in the HVAC ducts, and in what's called vermiculite, which is an older style insulation that looks like rock pebbles up in the attic. So it's pretty common to come across it. Now, when I come across it, I can't identify it as saying, hey, this is asbestos. I have to say suspected asbestos material because I did not test it. I'm not a lab. However, we see this day in and day out. We kind of know, what's likely to be asbestos, and I talk to my clients in real terms. So if I go up into an attic and I find that you've got HVAC ducts that look like they're made out of asbestos, now I'm really paying attention to the condition of them. Not that I wasn't before, but extra more so because it's a health concern now. Right. So I'm looking to see if somebody's crawled over a duct and damaged it, if they put their foot through it, if they've stored something up there and has poked a hole in it. Because when you damage asbestos, it becomes what's called friable. It releases the fibers that are in the asbestos that are known to cause mesothelioma. And when it releases that, it releases it into the air and it circulates around. So you certainly don't want it circulating through an HVAC duct and pumping into a bedroom per se. I have had that in a situation where it was the daughter's room, and mother had no idea, and I was up there and just pumping it full of asbestos fibers, and I had to let the seller know, listen, you need to get this fixed right away, because it's a health concern. So we do come across it. The fix, if you have asbestos ducts, you can get new ducting put in. You can have tests done to see if there's asbestos in your insulation because of that damage, and have the insulation replaced out. There's things you can do to fix it. If it's in your drywall, you would never know. And the only time you would be concerned is if you're doing a remodel and you're pulling down drywall. That's when you want to make sure you test it prior to that. You have a little piece of it, or you find a tape joint and you have a piece of that tested. If it tests positive for asbestos, then you make sure you take the precautions, have the right people do your remodel and seal off the area. Otherwise, what's going to happen? It's in a wall behind many layers of latex paint. It's not really going to hurt anybody unless you're chewing on the wall.
Well, here's the question, right? I know it was a style probably in the 70s, 80s, maybe early 90s, but you saw popcorn ceilings, and popcorn ceilings known to have some percentage of asbestos.
Yeah, not all of it, but much of it. Quite a bit of it does. So there again, you can just scrape off a little piece and send it off to be tested and find out. And if it has it and you want to scrape your ceilings because it looks so much better than that popcorn, be sure to have it done by a qualified professional.
So you wouldn't do it yourself like painting? Because some people are like, oh, that should be easy. I'll just like painting, I'll do it myself.
Yeah, well, there's things I would do myself, but I wouldn't tell my clients to do themselves. So anytime you're dealing with health issues like that, you want to make sure the proper steps are taken, because, the last thing you want to do is find out, 40 years down the line, you or one of your children has mesothelioma, and you have that in the back of your head. Was it the asbestos I exposed them to?
Right. You saved a couple dollars, maybe saved a couple $1,000s, but yet your health was impacted.
Yeah, and now your mental state will be affected possibly, because no one wants to live with that guilt.
Right, for sure. I think this is a very similar route going into mold, right?
Yeah.
I know you're not a mold expert. You're not going to be able to test for it, and yet at the same time, you see there's certain things that are signs of potential for mold.
Yeah, and I'm not a testing lab, so when I see it, again, the mold is a 4-letter word. We're not supposed to say, oh, you got mold. We're supposed to say organic growth or bio appearing growth. Mildew is mold. penicillin's mold, made from mold.
Right.
So I'm looking for it, and a lot of times I have clients that are concerned about it. I've had many who are very sensitive to mold. In fact, a good friend of mine who was an inspector that I knew several years ago, you walk in, and if his nose was going, that meant there was mold in that house. So we watch for it, we look for it. I'm looking in all the common areas, which is under sinks and bathrooms, things like that, in garages where maybe there's a water softener system or a water heater. We're looking for any type of growth appearing substance. And if we find it, and I let them know, hey, it looks like you have a biogrowth here. You might want to get this tested by a mold testing company. And if it comes back positive as one of the toxic versions, there's millions of strands of mold. There's only a few that are toxic. But if it comes back as one of those, then we're going to want to get it remediated.
Right.
And so that's part of the, I guess, and from that point on, it goes into more your hands and part of the negotiation process, depending on what you find, I suppose.
Sure. Someone explained it to me, and correct me if I have the analogy wrong. It's sort of like allergies, right? Some people are allergic to seafood, some people are allergic to grass, some people are allergic to the sun.
Yeah.
So like the mold, like the impact of mold varies per person.
Correct.
Like you're saying that person, that inspector, could walk into a place and already immediately sense that there's mold, where somebody else may not.
Exactly right. And in my case, I can usually tell just by the smell. I'm not allergic to it, but if I walk into a house, I can kind of, you know what, I suspect there's something here, and I'm going to be looking harder for it just because it hits me a little harder. And that's a per person thing. Everybody's a little different. We have tendencies to react to things differently that are in the air.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think in the same realm, lead-based paint, right?
Yeah.
Lead-based paint. Talk to us a little bit about that.
What's the concern?
Do we still have lead in our paint? Was it a certain time frame that it did?
Yes.
What happens?
Yeah. So anytime you're in a house that was built in 1978 or prior, you're likely to be surrounded by lead-based paint. Even if it's a 79, 1980 home, there's a chance because some of the builders had it on their shelves and they were using it up. But more so 78 and prior. The concern with lead-based paint is how it affects our brain, our minds, especially young minds. The developing child's brain can be susceptible to lead, heavy metals, right? That's what there's a big concern with vaccines. Some people are anti-vaxxers because they say there's heavy metals in the vaccines and it's affecting their children. It's the same thing. So lead-based paint, how does it pose a danger to somebody? It's paint, it's dry, it's on the wall. Well, in that state, it really doesn't, unless, again, you're chewing on the wall. But lead dust created by opening and closing wood frame windows that are painted with lead-based paint, that's where it comes into effect. It will get into the house, it'll get into the carpet, on the floor, on the walls. And then outside, where the paint is subject to weather, you get cracking, chipping, peeling paint, and it falls down into the soil and stays there because it's heavy. And children play in the dirt. I play in the dirt, I'm still a kid. So they're out there creating dust, and they have a likelihood of breathing that in or absorbing that in some way. I'm not a doctor, but I know that these are the concerns. So what do? I don't test for lead-based paint. I let you know that it's a high likelihood that you may have it in this home. And then I let you know that you may want to have some samples tested. And if it comes back that you do have lead-based paint, you can check the soil as well. And then you can look at removing the top few inches of the soil around the home, the immediate perimeter of the home, and replacing it with other soil. And that's how you get rid of it. It's gone at that point.
Interesting.
The paint inside
sounds like a relatively easy fix in that sense.
Relatively easy fix, yeah. It's a few yards of dirt that is hauled in and hauled away. Inside the house, it's encapsulated most likely.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, because some homes, it might not have it on the exterior, but might have it in the interior. And yet at the same time, there's been multiple homeowners who have purchased it. They've repainted to the colors that they wanted. And it's an older home, 1950s, 1940s, or even one of the homes I have, 1920.
There you go.
Should we expect there to be lead-based paint, even though it's been repainted multiple times now?
Yeah, you should, because you don't strip an interior wall. Typically, you just paint over the paint that's there. So you're gonna likely find lead-based paint behind it, but it's behind it. It's behind many layers, many years of latex paint. It's encapsulated, so to speak. So it's really not a concern. Again, unless you have wood frame windows that you're opening and closing that are original to the house, or at least have been there since 1978 or prior. And then you want to look at, okay, these windows have been here and I've been using them. The paint's probably long worn away and it's now been latex paint that's been wearing in there. But just know that that's where the concern would be. It's sort of like we talked about asbestos earlier. On the HVAC ducts, some of them were coated with asbestos in homes as a sort of an insulator. And that coating sometimes would start flaking and chipping. One of the authorized repairs I've seen is they coat it, basically, for lack of better terms, paint. They paint over it to encapsulate that asbestos. So it's sort of the same thing. You know, you're encapsulating the lead paint.
But how do you resolve it? If so, there's most likely a high certainty that there is lead. Should you resolve it? Should it be as something concern? What would you need to do?
That would be case by case and individual preference.
I see.
If your home, you mentioned you're in a 1920 home. I'm sure, knowing you, it's a very nice home. If it was in the state of being remodeled, or you bought it and it needed a lot of repair and there's a lot of flaking paint, in that case, outside, I would make sure that I had the painter scrape as much as he could, sand, scrape, paint, primer paint. And then after that, I would test the soil. And if I have young children, and remove the soil, and replace it. Inside the house, on the interior walls, I would just paint. Around the window casings, I would scrape, sand, and then paint to make sure I got rid of it all.
Makes sense.
That's me personally, in a situation where the paint is in disrepair.